Please welcome Michigan Director of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, Faye Alexander Nelson.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Well, first, let me begin my comments by thanking you for joining us here today. We are so pleased to partner with the Detroit Regional Chamber to support this conference and proud to sponsor this outstanding panel discussion this morning. Now, at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, children are at the heart of everything that we do, and we know that for children to thrive, they have to live in communities with equitable access to opportunities. And through our work in our home state of Michigan, we have learned time and again that people in the communities we serve know best what solutions will work to solve their challenges. We know that meaningful engagement of groups and individuals can often help us better understand the issues, build stronger relationships, and bridge divides. That is what this conference is all about. So in the policymaking space, we often see that both the process and outcomes can be polarizing and divisive. And in the philanthropic space, we have learned over time that truly sustainable change is driven and led by members of local communities. We think that reaching out, learning more, and bringing in voices who are typically not at the table can help to make our processes stronger and more sustainable at the state and at the national level. The policy-making process has an important impact on the lives of children, families, and communities. There are many problems and challenges to address here, and we know that we can't solve all of them, but what we can do is bring people into the process, make sure that folks are seen and heard, build leadership in communities and organizations, share power, and offer pathways for real lasting change. Inclusive policymaking is a way to do that. It moves us from the transactional interactions to transformational relationships and solutions. It can result in better policy and better implementation. It can actually make government work, and it can make businesses stronger and more competitive. So whether you're an elected official, a business leader, hold an appointed position, an agency or nonprofit leader, whether or not you consider yourself a conservative or progressive, know that you have the power to help drive transformational change for people who need it the most. And doing it can be complex, but the good news is that you're not alone and it can be done. To tackle the inequities that shape disparities, collaboration and partnership among both public and private sectors and community are essential. Now, on a separate note, in the coming weeks, we expect the U.S. Supreme Court to issue rulings on several cases that, when taken together, could have tremendous impact on the progress we have made as a country towards greater racial equity. In particular, it could further limit or eliminate affirmative action, silence the voice of underrepresented voters, and erode their sovereignty. In the face of these barriers, it is important to remember that inclusive policymaking is an important tool to ensure that a broad range of views and voices are able to come together and are represented in the policy process. So, now, let's move to our panel. We have an incredible panel today that will help us explore this issue. To guide us in today's discussion is Kat Stafford. Kat is a national investigative writer and global investigations correspondent at the Associated Press. A native of the east side of Detroit, she joined the AP in 2020 as a national race and equity writer to cover the intersection of race and politics. Prior to joining the AP, Kat was an investigative reporter at the Detroit Free Press, one of Michigan's largest daily newspapers. Her reporting there prompted city legislation, policy changes, congressional reviews, and federal and state investigations. A fierce leader in her field, Kat has way too many awards, accolades, and leadership positions to mention. So I'm just going to say that we are extraordinarily pleased to have her here with us today to lead this very important conversation. So please join me in welcoming Kat to the stage. Kat?
Thank you so much, Faye. I want to welcome our panel to the stage, starting with Lieutenant Governor Garlin Gilchrist. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. So this is an amazing panel. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I want to read the bios that I have for this great panel, starting with the Lieutenant Governor. Lieutenant Governor Garlin Gilchrist grew up on Detroit's east side and worked for Microsoft before helping run social media for Barack Obama's first presidential campaign in 2008. He ran national political campaigns for the liberal group MoveOn.org in Washington, D.C., before returning to Detroit in 2014 as Director of Innovation and Emerging Technology for Mayor Mike Duggan. As part of the Whitmer administration, Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist has sought to address injustice and equity across our state at every level, from co-chairing the Michigan Joint Task Force on jail and pretrial incarceration to helming the Coronavirus Task Force on racial disparities. These task forces have taken action that save lives and protect our most vulnerable populations. Lieutenant Governor's approach to addressing these disparities is deeply rooted in fact-based practices, science, and connecting with individuals across Michigan. Thank you so much for joining us. Our next panelist is Celina Barrios-Millner. She is the co-vice president of the Office of Race and Equity Research at the Urban Institute, a national data and evidence-based policy think tank based in Washington, D.C., where she manages the office's support for equity-oriented research and practice. Celina brings 20 years of experience advancing transformational equity and inclusion strategies through the public sector. She served in senior roles in Boston, where she was charged with embedding equity and racial justice into all city planning and operations. She established the city's supplier diversity program and oversaw the city's local hiring policy and helped design the city's immigrant advancement agenda. And last but not least, we have Isabel Medellin, who is a change agent serving as Global Director for DEI and Talent Acquisition at Steelcase, based in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Steelcase is a recognized global leader in office furniture design and creating people-centered workspaces. She was the first person the company hired in Monterrey, Mexico, as a human resources manager to ramp up holistic operations for the company's global business startup. She went on to become managing director of operations for the Global Business Center before moving to the US to lead the corporation's DEI strategy, talent acquisition, and company culture. She is passionate about creating cultures of belonging where people and businesses can thrive, and in her work, she helps leaders and teams across the globe develop strategies for advancing talent and amplifying business impact through more inclusive and equitable environments. So really just a phenomenal panel that we have today. But before we get started, just a quick housekeeping note. There are note cards at every single table. We're going to have a Q&A audience portion, so please fill them out with your questions, and someone will come around, gather them up, and we'll try to ask some of these questions to our panelists today. So I want to start. The Kellogg Foundation has a report that they released in 2018 called The Business Case for Equity that's pretty illuminating. What they found was that by 2050, they estimate that 40% of Michigan's workforce and consumers will be people of color. Second, it estimates that if Michigan were able to eliminate racial disparities by 2050, there will be a $92 billion gain in economic output. So to me, it's clear that racial equity is vital for our state, our country, something that we all should prioritize across every sector, every industry. So can each of you share from your unique perspective, why is racial equity such a crucial part when you're talking about inclusive policymaking? Let's start with you, Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you, Kat, and I want to thank everybody for joining this panel. I think this is the perfect conversation, frankly, to kick off this Mackinac Policy Conference, because I think it will really ground us in the role that we all have to play to ensure that everybody in Michigan has a chance to be themselves, to be successful, and that giving everyone equitable access to opportunity is how our state will ultimately advance and move forward to its highest potential. And I think from my perspective as a policymaker, and me and Governor Gretchen Whitmer, it's pretty clear we've been unapologetic about the fact that policies and programs in the state of Michigan need to be more equitable, and by that, we need to recognize that different people, different communities have different needs, and therefore we need to invest differently, whether it's in education and recognizing that the communities that are fighting persistent poverty need to have more and deeper investment in their education, not merely equality in their educational investments, and we've done that every year that we've been in office, but also recognizing that from a business opportunity perspective, we have so many people who have been locked out of the traditional system of financing and loans to be able to grow their businesses or start their businesses. We've done things like create the Michigan Economic Opportunity Fund, which specifically and exclusively focuses on those disadvantaged communities, Black folks, entrepreneurs of color, women, people living with disabilities, and saying that this fund will help you even when you cannot get a bank loan because you've been discriminated by that system. And so our hope is that the choices we can make in the public sector can frankly be models for those private sector entities that have not yet caught up. Now, we are proud that so many entities, Steelcase being one of them, have made explicit choices and commitments and have made investments in improving how inclusive they run their business, their leadership of their businesses. And we want to see that continue because, you know, with this whole theme of our conference, the power of and, what it means is that you get more when you add and multiply than when you subtract and divide. And so that's, I think, the opportunity that we have to demonstrate.
Celina?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You know, I think that we leave so many opportunities on the table in terms of investing in our local talent, investing in future-oriented careers for our young people, in the values of our neighborhoods. I think that if everybody has an opportunity to thrive, an opportunity to be healthy, an opportunity to grow, it benefits all of us. And I think the pandemic really hit home how interdependent and how connected we all are. And that if any sector, I remember, you know, I live in the city of Boston, and the first businesses that took a hit in our community were those in Chinatown because of you know, the rumors and what was going on. And we rallied around and we understood, like, if part of our community is hurting, so are all of us. And of course, before you knew it, everybody was shut down. Everybody was interconnected, no matter where you were, no matter if you were remote or not. And so I think that just laid bare both how interconnected we are and how fragile all of our prosperity is if any piece of the chain is broken. So now you take away the pandemic, and that's happening every day. Like a lot of people of color were like, yeah, we've been struggling, right? But now you see us, and now you see what's going on. So I think that, to me, that just hits home how much we really need to strengthen those ties across communities and make sure that everybody has access to thrive, because it benefits all of us.
Isabel, I'd love to hear from your perspective being in the business sector.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and strategy is about making choices, and we are committed to design a better future for the well-being and the planet, and we do that by acting with integrity, helping our community thrive, and fostering inclusion. And racial equity and inclusive policy making are an essential part of that. And for us, it's about two things. First, it is the right thing to do, period. It's the right thing to do. And second, we know it increases performance, innovation, and growth. There is a lot of external research that shows how companies that are strong in DEI outperforms others financially by about 30%. So it is the right thing to do, and it helps us to progress in our business. And I think that if I can make an analogy or a metaphor, companies, as well as our Michigan community, is like a dynamic ecosystem. So racial equity are the seeds that we need to make our community thrive, and we need to cultivate and grow that together.
Absolutely. So, Lieutenant Governor, both of us, we grew up on Detroit's east side, so we've seen the beauty of the city, the resilience of the residents there, but, growing up, I think we've also have seen the legacy of structural racism and how that shows up, disinvestment, what that looks like. So for me, that made me want to become a journalist so that I could reflect my community and the coverage that I saw. I didn't see myself growing up oftentimes. So for you, how has that lived experience of growing up in a city like Detroit shaped who you are today and the work that you do now?
I appreciate that question. So I'll use, since we're at a conference that has a lot of business leaders, so I never met an entrepreneur when I was a child. I thought that businesses just happened. I didn't realize that a person had to start them, take a risk, be invested in order to create something that made money and prosperity in the community. What I saw were people who were working incredibly hard, who were dealing with unfair circumstances, who were overtly and covertly discriminated against or locked out of opportunity. So for me, there were sort of two tracks. One was an educational one. I was blessed to have a grandmother who was a Detroit public school teacher who had the foresight to buy her baby a computer. And so that led me to fall in love with technology and something that I pursued as a professional. But I also pursued that in a way that was about empowering people in their experiences. So my first job was actually, I built computers. I learned how to build computers myself and installed the first 5 that I built at a rec center on the west side, Bustle Rec Center, for those who don't know, the one with the ice rink on Linden, and then taught people how to use them. And so worked with, for example, there was a woman who was returning to the workforce after her kids got a little older, so showed her how to use Microsoft Word to make a resume. Showed one of our elders how to use the mouse playing solitaire, which I know was a mouse tutorial. But the most important one, though, was I got a chance to show this little girl named April the internet for the first time. And using the robust search engine that was Alta Vista in 1998. Got a chance for her to search for a tiger and to see the picture of a tiger that wasn't at the Detroit Zoo, but that was in the jungle. And her thinking, where is that? And that her imagination exploding and creating that access to the opportunity. So when we think about being inclusive, it's about not only bringing experiences to our communities for exposure to technology that may be an engineer, but it's also about sitting with people and realizing what are the goals that they want to achieve, and then finding ways to bring it closer to them, to make that more possible. And I wouldn't have learned that if I didn't grow up where I grew up.
And I think that's a perfect example of why it's so important to make sure that folks from across various communities have a seat at the table to have this type of impact that you have had.
That's right.
So Celina, you co-lead the Urban Institute's race and equity research. And as a journalist, I use a lot of research, a lot of data, a lot of stats to try and bolster the reporting that I do around race in America, because frankly, there are a lot of people that refuse to acknowledge the role of structural racism. So for you, how can policymakers or just anyone, I guess, in this room use data to really show and acknowledge and correct or eliminate these inequities that we are talking about today?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that equity is at its core about correcting an imbalance, right? And when you have an imbalance, you have to know what the reference point is, and you have to know what you're comparing, right? Just from a real, scientific point of view. And so if you don't know where you're trying to go or what your starting point is, then it's really hard to get anywhere. And that applies to all types of policy making. I think that, and having been in a policy-making role previously in the city of Boston, I know that a lot of things are really hard to measure, and a lot of things you don't have complete data. You might know, your Latino population, but you might not know immigrant background, and that might affect the type of services people are eligible for. So you're never, I want people to remove the veil of perfect data, right? You're never gonna have it, but you have to have a starting point, and you have to know where you're going. And if you don't have the data that you need, you have to find ways to find it. Back to the pandemic example, we had what we did, right, when really before even things closed down, we started reaching out to our small business owners and asking them, how is this affecting you? Are you shut down yet? And we started these weekly calls, just a conference number, and that evolved over time. We got Zoom bombed, we went through all the things, but there was just this weekly touch point. That was data, right? Like we were hearing from people directly, and then we were establishing contacts and information so that we could continue to involve people as we rolled out programs, as we started to get support dollars, as we started to get our local philanthropies setting up emergency funds. And we were hearing about the needs for reopening, and we don't have it in our budget to get the plexiglass screens. And those are all things that some of them are intuitive, some of them, if you're a policymaker that's connected to your community, it makes sense, but some of them are not. And so I think it's really important to know, and sometimes the data is coming directly from people, and then you just find ways to track it and keep up with it. And other times you have it, through the census data or the data that you collect when people register their businesses. I mean, my favorite thing is when people are like, I have no data. I'm like, oh, but you do. I'm like, you have 311 data. You have all of this information that you might not think of in terms of that's at your disposal. So I just think that you have to be able to track, both set goals and track progress, and most importantly, see who's being left out. And I think that if you don't have a data-informed approach or even a research-informed approach, then you might miss the mark.
Can I ask something?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
So I appreciate that. One of the things that has been important in the Governor and I's approach is the fact that you have to have the courage to count things. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of people who, and especially in Michigan, we've had some challenges with this in terms of some laws that are complicated back since 2006, I guess it was. But you have to count things in order to observe them. And so, that was the defining characteristic of our COVID response with our racial disparities task force, and that we had the courage to say that we actually want to count to see how this is landing on different communities. And it's like, oh, wait, this virus is killing black people at a rate of 5 times killing white people. That's something we can't let stand. And so therefore, we had a unique approach to then addressing that. And we're the only state to eradicate that racial disparity in COVID-19 mortality because we were the only state to try it. And so I think the courage to open your eyes to problems is really what's important. And when we think about all the roles that all of us can play in our institutions, that's something that we can all do. That's available to the private sector, it's available to the public sector, available to philanthropy. That open your eyes and actually attempt to find where the opportunities to problem solve are. And I think that's how we can make a difference. And that will lead to more inclusive policymaking because you are actually seeing who needs to be included.
Yeah, and it also sounds like innovation is also at the core of this and going outside of the typical realms of how we gather data or what we consider to be research. I think that's also crucial here. So Isabel, we've been talking about inclusive policymaking, but I also want to address just the business community as well. So what are some key takeaways, I guess, and lessons that you have learned that are applicable to what we're talking about?
Well, the first lesson is that it's important to favor always progress over perfection. There is a lot of work to be done, so take action, whatever it is that. It's important to favor progress over perfection. And the second is the relevance of working on a change model for progress and having a systems approach. And I want to expand on the importance of building this baseline and have the courage to count things and have the courage to share some stories and have the courage to be vulnerable and ask for help when you want to work with something. So I will say have a systems approach, have a clear strategy, goals, initiatives, and progress measures. It's important that we measure things and have clear outcomes so we can drive a long-term sustainable change. And for us, our participation in the Expanding Equity program with the Kellogg Foundation has been fantastic as a source to inform our choices because we look at our annual results, we listen our employees, we look at our data, and we look at external research, and we get coaching through the Expanding Equity program. So all this helps us to have a system approach and make informed decisions.
And so this work isn't easy, though. You know, and when you're talking about race, when you're talking about racism, equity, there are folks that don't understand how to even get started. There are also folks that just, again, outright refuse to acknowledge this hard truth about our country. So what challenges do all of you see on the horizon in terms of getting this crucial work done? Lieutenant Governor?
I mean, being discriminated against is not easy. I mean, like, I think on the one hand, it's kind of interesting that we talk about how hard it is to acknowledge it. Like, it's really hard to have racism impact you negatively. So I think we need to be real about that. I think the other piece, though, what could perhaps make the solutions a little more accessible is if you have a little bit of that courage. You know, what you'll find in the sort of second chapter of my career as a community organizer, what I learned is that the truth is the people who are experiencing the problem are the people who know the solution. And more so than you feeling like you're the smartest person in the room and you understand everything, like the people who are actually going through the challenge, they probably understand it better than you. And so it's important then to create space for people to give you that input. Because the other truth is people actually want to tell you what the solution is. But you can't be scared to listen to it and scared to hear it and recognize that it might mean that you need to do something differently, and that's okay. When we think about this word innovation and what that means, to me, it means you have to do things that are new, that are different, that are better, but that also create more value for more people. And the more people part of it is where the inclusion comes in, to widen the table, to widen access. And I think, so the hard part about that is being willing to recognize that you need to do better. But the truth is, that is how we improve. Like, you improve when you recognize that you need to improve. You know, all of us are used to doing that in different realms of our lives, personally and professionally. But we need to have that same attitude and energy toward that in inclusion and not act like it's politically difficult to get better, because I don't think that is.
Celina?
Yeah, I think that I couldn't agree more that you can learn a lot from the people around you and the people who you're targeting in your different interventions. So we call that a community engaged approach, and it's the difference within the research setting, which is what we do. Every research project is going to have a community that it's trying to influence or support or help. So you might say, oh, that's a community engaged project because they surveyed people, they got data, they measured the outcomes. The difference is, did people help you shape the research questions? You know, that's what we mean by participatory, by community engaged. So it's not just getting people's opinions or getting their feedback or getting their vote, right? It is about bringing them into what are the problems that we need to tackle for your community. So even starting at that moment of inception. And I think sometimes it can be really paralyzing to know where to start, but listening sessions, they're like the lifeblood of our democracy, is to go out and talk to people. And you don't even have to frame it in an equity frame or anything. It's what challenges are you facing? And when you start to see commonality in lower income neighborhoods or by race and gender or whatever it is, then you can start to shape some interventions around it. And so I think that it's really important to listen. I think it's also important to have internally in government at least or in business a shared understanding and shared definitions of what you mean by equity or what you mean by whatever type of work you're trying to do, because I think we all sort of assume everyone has the same understanding, but that was something that we work a lot on both in my new organization when I was in government, is having that shared understanding and doing internal capacity building as well, and doing trainings and getting on the same page, even if you think that you know what you're talking about. It's important for everyone that's working together to have the same understanding of what you're talking about and the same approach. And so I think it's really important to both engage the community, but also build your own internal capacity so that everyone's on the same page when you're going about this work.
Isabel?
Yeah, no, and I agree with Celina because she's talking about alignment. And it's very important to have clarity on what is the real problem that we are trying to solve as community and how to get it done. And for me, there are two important things. One is about culture, because we are talking about policy making and racial equity and diversity, equity, and inclusion. But it's beyond that. This is about culture and who we are in how we conduct business, and how essential is to make progress on this to help the communities we live and work to thrive. And this system approach and understanding that this work needs all of us, be it silo organizations or government or community, we can make progress. This work needs all of us. So I will say, look at your organizations, look at your community, look at your data, have clarity on the real problem to solve, make choices.
And so I want to stay with this because one thing that I have heard a lot from Detroiters as well as other parts of our state are folks feel that oftentimes decisions are being made for them and they're not happening with them being part of the conversation or having them at the table to talk about these things. So what does that look like from each of your perspectives? How do you engage the folks that need to be a part of these conversations? I think, Lieutenant Governor, you said at the start, it's important to have these folks on the ground in the community be a part of this. They're the ones that are being impacted. So what does that look like? How do you engage?
Let me give you two examples. So in the realm of education policy, so the governor and I established an advisory council made up of teachers to advise the executive office of the governor on education policy. Does that sound interesting to you? Because that had never happened before in the history of Michigan government. Actually asking classroom teaching professionals to give direct input to the executive of the state of Michigan who would be helping shape education policy. So I think sometimes we try to overcomplicate that. It's not complicated. If you want to understand how to deal with a challenge, you should talk to the people who deal with the challenge and then create a space for them to be part of it. It's not hard. And so one of the things I struggle with is people calling things hard that are not hard. And that happens, I think, a lot in this space. And so another example, for I mentioned the Michigan Coronavirus Task Force on Racial Disparities. So in order for us to deal with this very big challenge of this virus, again, that had disparate impact on people of color in Michigan, we needed to have a table that had everybody represented from all walks of life. So again, we said, well, what are the walks of life we need represented? We need young people and students. We need labor. We need education professionals. So we had K-12 education, childcare, higher education, community colleges represented. We needed to have labor and clergy. We needed to have our tribal and indigenous nations represented. We needed to have geographic representation from across the state of Michigan. We needed to have, we have minority and ethnic commissions in the state of Michigan that are represented in the task force. And we had every state department and agency participate in every meeting of this task force that met on Friday afternoons at 3:30 every week for 2.5 years to try to deal with this problem. So I think what it looks like is trying. I mean, to make it really simple, the thing that I learned during this process is that you make progress when you try. That matters, and to actually do that earnestly and intentionally, and to recognize that you can make the progress and have the confidence to try, the courage to try. I think that's really how we do it. But I think it's a mistake to overcomplicate this. Like there's a magic formula to inclusion. Inclusion is being inclusive. I don't think it's that complicated. But we have to be able to do that.
Yes. It's an excellent point. Celina, please jump in.
Well, I mean, you can't say it any better than that. But I think that one thing I've learned both in our, we produced this Community Voice and Power guidebook at the Urban Institute that has some best practices and toolkits on inclusion. We have some, for example, we piloted this concept of data walks. And so when you actually going into a community and walking them through their data and having them, does this resonate with you? Is this your experience? So kind of having that living conversation instead of just saying, well, this is what the data says. But what we have learned both in my time at Urban and in my time in government is that you have to have many different ways of engaging people because people have different ways of connecting, different bandwidth. You have to make sure that it's multilingual, any of your outreach is multilingual, that yes, people can come to a community meeting, but that there's also surveys available, or that you can, people who are more comfortable in social media can, tweet at the governor or the mayor or whatever it is. So I think that you have to have lots of different data points and points of engagement. And now we have the ability to have virtual events and virtual town halls, which I think has opened things up for so many people that maybe can't get across the city in time or don't have childcare. So I think that you have to make it accessible for folks. We've also found this is all, again, like nobody needs to do research to understand this, but providing childcare at community meetings, right? Having interpretation in different languages, having meetings that are convenient to either public transportation or where people live, So I think that really thinking about the best way and lots of different ways of connecting with folks, I think is really important. We have also found I've done a lot of work in the immigrant community, and people are really rightfully very scared of giving data, giving their name. And so a lot of times you want to ask demographic information just to know that, okay, we've spoken with all the different communities we wanted to reach, but it can be really intimidating to engage with government or to engage everyone right now there's so many scams out there and for all of us. And so I think that thinking of ways that, working through trusted community organizations that serve a particular community is a different way than saying we're doing an immigrant community listening session, right? That might be a little more intimidating than saying we're doing a listening session, with this organization, right? And so I think that just thinking of different trusted messengers, and the last one I'll say, because we have Kat up here, is that local media, ethnic media, can be a really great connection point if you're trying to reach immigrant communities of color, and that can be a really good boost to anyone's outreach, and we found that both at the national and local levels.
Yes. And Isabel, I would love for you to talk about this, especially from the business perspective, in terms of engaging with folks, but also addressing perhaps toxic environments within corporate settings. So what does that look like?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And we are a human-centered company. So I will say, think like a designer and have two things in mind, or principles that will be one impact, and the other is simplicity. And one thing is gather different perspectives and design for people than designing or co-designing with them. So I agree on all the steps that you mentioned, and I will add, have clear control points or learning points or key touch points with people, so you will have this inspiration, ideation, and then implementation process and have this closed loop system approach. And I'm talking about a closed loop system and get feedback, how you embed DEI and inclusive policy and racial equity sensibilities at a strategic level across organizations. And different things that we look at it is one, this is part of who we are and is in our core values. Also, it is embedded in our leadership pillars. And just to share a couple of examples, one is building strong teams, and the other is create unity. And to achieve this, you need to display different inclusive behaviors, such as bringing diverse perspective, listening with empathy, and just treat each other with mutual respect. And as part of that system approach, we have a platform named UMU. So we provide feedback, or employees provide feedback to leaders, and this system sends them not just so they can have in front of them things that they can reinforce to display these inclusive behaviors and improve our culture experience. So in summary, I will say that as much as you can, embed this through different elements of your organizational system to make it transformational. If not, it becomes just an initiative.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so I want to transition because we have some really great questions from the audience. One that I really wanted to get to myself. So this person asks, can you touch on historic redlining, its economic effects plus the economic potential of investment? And the second part of the question is, how do you get more political policy and business buy-in through inclusive processes?
Okay, so first off, I think the acknowledgement of the fact that intentional redlining happened is important. And I do think it's difficult to deny that. I think people have seen the evidence over and over and over and over and over again. So as a result of that, or in part in response to that, one of the things that Governor Whitmer and I released last year was the state of Michigan's first ever statewide housing plan. And in that statewide housing plan, we actually offered a pathway to build the types of affordable housing that we actually need in communities across the state of Michigan. We coupled that housing plan with, over the last 18 months, a $250 million investment at the state level in affordable housing. It's the largest investment that's ever been made in creating affordable housing in Michigan, put into our state's housing trust fund. Now, part of the reason why we need so much investment today is because people have been redlined out of housing opportunities for decades. And so we hope that those dollars, we projected that would draw down an additional probably about $550, $600 million in private investment in creating the broad type of housing stock that we need, whether that's seasonal housing in communities like the one we're in, whether that is multifamily, single family, just looking at a broad array of options for people. We think that this can have the potential for political buy-in because this is a challenge in every community. It looks a little different, but in every city that I go to, and Michigan's got 83 counties and 2 peninsulas, I've been to all of them more than once, and every community says we don't have enough places for people to live if they can afford it. So we have to address that in 2 ways. One, we have to actually build more affordable housing, and then we have to also make sure we can prepare and position people to be able to afford housing. And so the investments that we make in a more equitable way to deal with that historic redlining when it comes to the education investments, the educational attainment opportunities through higher education and job creation, we think those coupled together would allow us to have the political buy-in to deal with the kinds of housing opportunities that we need to have. And I'm proud that we've been able to make that kind of progress. And we need to figure out how to sustain that in an ongoing way to make sure that we have an annual commitment to affordable housing as an example. But I think that's how we deal with that historic redlining, by actually making the investment to right it. But we have to acknowledge this problem.
And Celina, I would love your thoughts on this question, because when you think of redlining, it doesn't just impact housing. We just published a project looking at health inequities and how that has impacted generations of Black Americans, essentially from birth to death. And one of those really huge impacts has been redlining. It impacts where people live, the exposure to pollutants, all of these things that you typically might not think that are connected to redlining. So can you talk a little bit about how segregation, redlining, how that has had such an impact when you're talking about racial inequities in particular?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if I had to pick one issue that's kind of like the one underlying all of what we might call the social determinants of health, or what determines whether you will be healthy and thrive versus not? Wealth is underlying all of that. And for most Americans, your source of wealth and intergenerational wealth is your home, right? Like, that's something that you invest in, you pass on. And unfortunately, for a lot of communities, that hasn't been an option. And I think that because systems like redlining, and like if you look at the GI Bill and who benefited from the GI Bill, all of these, what are the markers of the American middle class, right? It's like having a good job, having a home, having access to transportation. People have been intentionally excluded, Black people in particular, and now the broader people of color category have been intentionally excluded. It's well documented, right? Like, we just need to move on and accept that that's the fact. So that means that we have to design to reverse that. We can't, if we just maintain the status quo is built on this foundation of racism. And it's painful, But it's true, and I think that the more that we can acknowledge that and work against it and do programs like you all are doing here in Michigan to counterbalance that, it benefits all of us. But I just think we need to really understand that all of those were policy choices at those times, and now we have the opportunity to make policy decisions that reverse and put us all on a better footing.
And Kat, just I would like to add something from a talent perspective about how we can connect people to opportunity, how we can reach out talent that is everywhere and that comes from communities that traditionally have been underrepresented. And I want to mention just a couple of organizations, for example, partnership with historical Black college and universities, in our case with the Marshall Thurgood College Fund, or the Building Bridges programs with the West Michigan Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Both programs help us to connect with talent, to get to know, to get their feedback, and also to provide input on things that they are developing, so we can build a stronger pipeline and connect them with opportunity, in our case, with organizations.
And so I want to combine these two questions because I think they're very important. So how can those most impacted by inequitable policies help design policy on the front end? So let's start with that.
Again, I mean, I think this is similar to my answer previously. So as far as informing the strategy that we put together, that is involved bringing people to the table in different communities. So part of my approach as Lieutenant Governor has been spending a lot of time talking to people, meeting people where they're at. Whether it was a tour I did called Thriving Cities in 2019, we went to 19 cities. In 2021, we went to 24 cities across the state, and having conversations about what it took to improve quality of life for people who live in cities. And we talked about issues of creating generational economic opportunity, kids in cities, environmental quality and justice, transportation, transit, and mobility, and affordable and available housing. And so I've certainly tried to model how, again, we can bring these community conversations together. And the people who participate in those conversations were both people who may have been dealing with in real time housing insecurity, may have had that experience in their past, but also the people on the ground, many in sort of advocacy organizations and advocacy roles, that were working with people in the community who were dealing with these issues so that they could, again, give input and perspective. And those tours literally are what led to that first $100 million investment in the state's community development fund. So I think we tried to demonstrate that, again, meeting people where they are, talking to them and understanding what the priorities need to be will result in policy change. At least it has in this administration. And I think we have a lot of legislators in the room, and I think you'll see with the current legislature in Michigan, you'll see even more responsible policies as a result.
And Celina and Isabel, for this question, I would love for you guys to chime in quickly. This person asks, you mentioned listening sessions and intentional work to create shared understanding in language. What are other techniques community leaders and business folks can use to bring in marginalized voices?
Yeah, I think that one of the strategies that I found effective, and this is in a supplier diversity context, right? So when you're trying to bring in diverse businesses, which, by the way, it is so much easier to contract in the private sector and the public sector. So this is definitely an opportunity for the business community because government contracting has so many different regulations. So just wanted to put a plug there. But what we found, we had listening sessions, targeting, small businesses, women, and minority-owned businesses. But what we found was most effective was actually being very specific about the types of businesses that we wanted to engage. And so we even kind of started working backwards from contracts. And so thinking about snow removal. So we're okay, let's find out who's doing snow removal, or who, if they had an infusion of capital, right, could get another truck and meet the needs of this contract. So the more targeted we got in the outcome we were trying to impact, the better engagement we got from people that showed up and the better ideas. So we were what are the challenges with the snow removal contract? Well, by the time they put it out, we don't have enough time to get additional equipment. Can you put it out earlier in the year? So just getting that very specific feedback that you can act on. So I would say having really targeted, broad conversations are really good, but also when you get really specific about the outcome you're trying to influence, then you get really, really helpful feedback. And we were able to, like, from one year to another, just like tenfold increase the number of minority-owned contractors with just like, we did 1 year of listening sessions and people partnered up with larger companies, and by the next year they could be primes on really, contracts that help them build their businesses. So I think that that's one best practice I would share.
Yeah.
Excellent. Isabel, from your perspective.
Yeah, each situation is unique. Definitely listening sessions is a great avenue. And it depends on that outcome that you are looking for. In our case, we like to use the critical thinking model. And also I would like to share about something we call action learning teams, or ALTs. So we have a problem to solve. There is a small group of people, could be 7 to 10, that come together, and that project has a start and an end, and they work around providing feedback on something and provide a recommendation. In a different context, we were looking to get additional feedback from our employees, so we designed a perceptions of culture of inclusion survey, and so we collect input from different sources.
And so my final question, I would not be a good journalist if I did not try this. Is there any news, you can break just in terms of looking forward? Forward-looking, what's next for you from the governor's office, just in terms of focusing on racial equity? What's next?
So we're going to break some news this week, I promise.
Okay.
Right now.
Yeah, today would be nice.
Look, so I think that the focus of the governor and I this week is on what we need to do to grow the state of Michigan so that more people will choose to stay in Michigan to build their families in the future, and that more people will choose to come to Michigan to build their family in their future. I think critical to that equation is ensuring that every person, again, no matter who you are, what walk of life you come from, what you look like, what you sound like, who you love, how you worship or don't worship, whatever, that you feel like you will be invested in, respected, protected under the law, not discriminated against in the state of Michigan. That you know that. And so this might be a few months back looking, but I think it's worth baselining. So we've expanded our state civil rights law to include explicit protection for the LGBTQ plus community. Compare us to other states. Other states are not doing that. We have overtly invested in saying that Michigan should be an amazing place for people to retire by actually making sure you can keep all of your retirement income and taking the tax off of that. That was implemented 12 years ago by my Republican predecessors. We have said that women will have full access to their reproductive freedom and choices in Michigan. There are states that are not doing that. And we have created funds like the Michigan Economic Opportunity Fund that are about, again, as I alluded to earlier, investing particularly in people with ideas who did not have access to financing previously. And last but not least, we recognize that a key part of growing our state and growing our economy is going to be broadening our economy to include more knowledge workers. And so I've been leading an effort for us to expand our technology and innovation and entrepreneurship pathways in the state of Michigan, all across the state of Michigan, including working to land a regional tech hub from the federal government here to attract that $25 million investment from the feds, and doing so in a way that will empower groups of people like the Black technology entrepreneurs that meet in Michigan Central Station every Saturday night. So this is the opportunity for us to build that. And so everything that you're going to hear from us is about what we can do to grow and how we can continue to invest in people and know that you will be safe and you will be your best and at your best opportunities.
Thank you so much. Everyone, please give a round of applause for our amazing panelists. Great job. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you.